We're alone. Let's do what's necessary, said the Apache woman who was given to a rancher as a joke. The desert wind hit Clearwater Station like a whip, throwing red dust into every crack of the earth. When the train screeched to a stop, Colm Barrett didn't move. He stood under the awning, hat low over his eyes, the sun carving lines into his weather-worn face. Then she stepped down barefoot, wrapped in a threadbare blanket, her dark eyes catching the light like wet obsidian. The crowd stared, murmured. Someone spat on the ground. Colm walked forward, each step cutting through the noise. He reached for the small sack in her hands, his voice low and steady. "Let's go." The girl hesitated, then nodded once. As they turned toward the road, a slip of paper pressed into his palm, Captain Harlan's handwriting he'd know anywhere. By the time he read the first line, his jaw had turned to stone. The road to Dry Willow Creek stretched empty under a sky bleached white by heat. Dust clung to the wagon wheels, to the man's boots, to every thought he tried to bury. Colm Barrett drove in silence, the reins loose in his hands. Beside him, the Apache girl sat straight-backed, eyes fixed on the horizon as if she could be herself somewhere else. San Simon Valley lay still around them, flat land and dying grass, the scent of iron and mesquite drifting through the wind. Once, soldiers had marched through these plains under banners that promised peace and left only ashes. Colm had been one of them. His homestead came into view near sundown, a weathered cabin crouched beside a dry creek bed. One horse, 2 fences half fallen. It wasn't much, but it was the only piece of earth where no one asked who he'd been. Inside, the air smelled of wood smoke and loneliness. Colm set down her small bag, gesturing to the loft above. "You can stay up there," he said quietly. "Don't you want to do what's necessary? You know what I mean?" the woman asked. "Get some rest," Colm answered, then walked away. She didn't move, only studied him with the wary stillness of a cornered animal. Her name, he would learn later, was Cyan, which meant little one with heart. Now, her face was thin from hunger, her hair loose and wind-tangled. A blue bead hung at her throat, the only color left from another life. He poured water from a clay jug, its coolness shocking against his cracked palms. Across the room, Cyan finally spoke, her voice hoarse from dust. "What did the letter say?" Colm looked at the folded page on the table, its ink bleeding under sweat and sun. He said after a moment, "Nothing that matters." Then he turned away, though the words inside still burned. A gift for the coward who couldn't finish the war. Outside, the cicadas started their evening cry, somewhere beyond the horizon. The desert wind carried the smell of rain that never came. Night fell fast over the valley. The desert cooled but did not rest. Crickets rasped, and the wind dragged sand against the cabin walls like a slow whisper. Inside, the single lamp burned low, throwing long shadows across the wooden floor. Colm sat at the table, hands folded, the untouched plate of beans gone cold. Across the room, Cyan crouched near the hearth, coaxing flame from a few reluctant logs. Her movements were quiet but deliberate, the way one handles something that has already hurt them too many times. He watched her for a moment before speaking. "You can use the bed if you want. The loft gets hot." She didn't look up. "I'll stay near the fire." Her English was halting, shaped by another language. Yet every word carried defiance. Silence filled the room again, thick, almost visible. Colm rose, walked to the door, and looked out at the endless dark. Somewhere out there, coyotes called to one another. He wondered if she heard them differently, if the sound meant home to her. When he turned back, Cyan was staring at the letter on the table. "You hide words," she said. He froze. "It's not for you." Her gaze sharpened. "But it speak of me." Colm's jaw tightened. He picked up the paper and tucked it into his coat. "It's finished." Cyan's lips pressed into a thin line. She turned away, curling the blanket closer around her shoulders. "White men always say that," she murmured. "Finished." Her tone wasn't bitter, only tired. It hit him harder than any accusation could. He wanted to tell her that he wasn't like the rest, that he hadn't asked for this, that he'd buried his gun years ago. But explanations meant nothing here. He sat back down, the chair creaking under his weight. "You have a name," she hesitated, then answered. "Cyan." He nodded. "Colm." The fire crackled between them. Neither spoke again for a long while. Yet the silence felt different, less sharp, more like an uneasy truce. Outside, thunder rolled over the horizon, too far to bring rain. When Colm finally rose to douse the lamp, he glanced at her one last time. Cyan's eyes were open, fixed on the flicker of dying firelight. There was no fear there anymore, only a watchfulness that matched his own. He lay awake long after, listening to the desert breathe. For the first time in years, the sound didn't make him feel alone. Days stretched long under the desert sun, each one nearly the same work. Heat, silence. Yet something imperceptible began to shift at Dry Willow Creek. The air still shimmered with dust, but the house no longer felt hollow. It carried sound, now the scrape of a bucket, the clang of a pot, the low murmur of two voices that rarely spoke, yet always seemed to listen. Cyan rose before dawn. She swept the floor, fed the horse, carried water from the well. Her bare feet made no sound on the packed earth. Colm worked the corral, fixing fence posts. His shoulders burned red beneath the relentless sun. They seldom spoke while working, but when they passed, they exchanged small nods, a silent language that said, "I see you. You're here." One morning, Colm found her crouched by the pump, cursing softly in Apache as the handle jammed. He stepped behind her, reached over, and pressed down once. The pump wheezed, coughed, and sent a burst of cold water over their hands. Cyan gasped and looked up at him, startled. Water dripped down both their wrists, shining like glass in the light. He gave a faint smile. "You've got to twist it a bit first." For the first time, she smiled back. Not wide, but real. In the afternoons, when the heat drove even the cicadas to silence, Cyan sat on the porch, mending a torn shirt. Colm would read old newspapers aloud, stumbling over faded words. She didn't understand much, but she liked the sound. His voice was rough and low, steady as a heartbeat. Sometimes she asked about words she heard often: freedom, promise, peace. He never had simple answers. Once, she asked, "You fought at Fort Bowie." He froze, paper halfway folded. "Yes." Her eyes searched him for a long moment. "You kill my people." He met her gaze. "Yes." There was no excuse, no story, only truth. She nodded once and looked away. But that night, when she laid out her blanket, she placed it closer to the fire, closer to him. Weeks passed. Clearwater still whispered the soldier and his Apache woman. A deputy came by one morning, spitting dust and warning, "Colm, that folks up top don't like seeing her free." Colm stood in the doorway, hand resting near his holster, but voice calm. "She works for me," he said. "She's under my roof, under my word. That's enough." The deputy sneered. "Word of a man like you doesn't count for much." Colm's eyes darkened. "Then it'll have to count for more." The man left without looking back. Cyan watched from the porch, her hands clenched around the railing. That night, she left a small bundle of dried sage at his door. "For strength," she said simply. Little by little, life took shape again. She learned how to grind grain with his old millstone. He learned the names of desert plants from her tongue: kahi for yucca, bidzeel for strength. Some evenings, she sang softly as she worked, melodies without words that made the air seem gentler. Then came the night of the rain. The sky had been grumbling for days, clouds thick with dust and thunder. They were fixing the corral when the wind changed, carrying the scent of wet earth. Cyan tilted her face upward, eyes closed, as the first drop hit her skin. "Rain," she whispered, almost laughing. Colm leaned on the post, watching her. "Haven't seen it in months." "It comes when it's called," she said. "If the heart remembers how." When the downpour finally came, it was sudden and wild. Water roared off the roof, spilling through the gutters. soaking the yard. Cyan stepped out barefoot into it, arms open, spinning slowly under the storm. Her hair clung to her cheeks, her laughter rising above the rain. Colm hesitated in the doorway, then stepped out too, letting the water run down his face like absolution. For a long time, they didn't speak. They just stood in it, two shapes blurred by silver rain. When he finally looked at her, she smiled through the curtain of water. "You have rain now," she said. He met her gaze, chest tightening. "No," he said softly. "We have rain." That night, the world felt cleaner. The roof dripped. The smell of wet cedar filled the cabin. Colm set a small tin cup of coffee in front of her. She took it carefully, hands trembling from the cold, and blew on the steam. "Why you live here alone?" she asked. He stared into his cup. "I came back from the war with too many ghosts. This was the farthest place I could find." Cyan nodded. "Ghosts follow, even into desert." Her words were not a warning, but understanding. The following days, the air turned cooler, and something unspoken lingered between them. Not romance, not yet, but a quiet belonging. Like two wounds learning how to close side by side. Colm found himself waiting for her laugh, listening for her footsteps. Cyan began humming as she worked, sometimes leaving little bundles of herbs by his tools, for luck. One evening, he found her outside near the cottonwoods, staring west, where the sunset burned red through the dust. "That mountain," she said, pointing. "My mother sang there, before soldiers came." Colm followed her gaze, the ache in his chest, sharp and familiar. "I'm sorry." Cyan turned toward him, her expression unreadable. "Sorry is only a word." "But you build new things." He didn't answer. But that night, before blowing out the lamp, he reached for the tarnished badge buried in his drawer. He turned it over once, then set it down for good. From that day on, there was no master or servant at Dry Willow Creek, only two souls bound by work, silence, and the fragile peace that came from not asking for forgiveness, but living as if it might still be possible. And when morning broke, Colm would often find a clay bowl of cool water waiting by the door, with the faint scent of sage floating above it. Cyan never said why she left it there, and he never asked. Some things, in that valley of red dust and regret, did not need words. The days after the rain came golden and calm, as if the desert itself had taken a long breath. The fields near Dry Willow Creek shimmered faintly green, and the scent of wet sage still lingered in the air. Cyan hummed when she worked. Colm caught himself listening more than he should have. He began to think foolishly. Perhaps that peace could last. But peace, in the desert, was always borrowed time. That afternoon, Cyan was sweeping the kitchen when she noticed the drawer slightly ajar. Inside, beneath a pile of folded shirts, a corner of yellowed paper peeked out. She pulled it free, smoothing the creases carefully. The writing was English, but the seal, an eagle stamped in wax, was one she recognized. The Army, Fort Bowie. Colm came in from the yard, just as she was staring at the page. "What are you doing?" he asked, too sharply. Her head snapped up. "It has your name." He crossed the room in 2 strides, snatching the paper from her hands. "You shouldn't touch things that aren't yours." Her voice trembled, though her eyes did not. "Then tell me, who sent it?" "It's nothing." She stepped closer. "It is something. I know this mark. It speaks of soldiers." "Drop it." Cyan. But she didn't. Her hand shot forward, gripping his sleeve. "Tell me." The paper crumpled between them. For a long moment, Colm's jaw worked as if he were chewing on glass. Then, quietly, "It's from Captain Harlan. Your friend." His laugh was dry, bitter. Once, she waited, the silence stretching between them like a drawn wire. Finally, he said, "He sent you. Called you a gift. A joke meant to shame me." Cyan's face drained of color. A gift. The word felt like poison in her mouth. "He said I could prove I still had mercy left." Colm muttered, his eyes on the floor. "That maybe if I kept you alive, I'd earn it back. Her breath hitched. So, I am your penance. He looked up, then guilt and pain carving deep lines in his face. No. You were never that. But she was already backing away, her voice raw. All this time, you knew. Cyan fled into the evening light, the door slamming behind her. Colm stood frozen, the letter crushed in his hand, listening to the sound of her footsteps fading into the open valley. By the time he reached the barn, she was gone. The wind had risen again, whipping red dust through the mesquite. He saddled his horse with shaking hands and rode hard into the night. The storm came without warning sheets of dust, low thunder rolling over the Chiricahua foothills. Each gust tore at his eyes and throat, but he pressed on, calling her name into the wind. Cyan, no answer, only the echo of his own guilt bouncing off the cliffs. Hours later, through the curtain of storm, he saw a small figure crouched by the dry creek bed. She was soaked in grit, clutching something to her chest. When he dismounted, he realized it was the letter creased, nearly torn apart. "Sayin," he said, voice hoarse. "You'll die out here." She didn't look up. "Why do you care? Maybe I should." He knelt beside her, reaching for her shoulder. But she flinched. "Don't," she hissed. "I thought you saw me." Not a thing they left behind. Rainless thunder cracked across the sky. Colm closed his eyes. "I did. I do. That letter, what he meant, doesn't define what's happened here." "Then what is this?" Her words shook. "You keep me because you pity me." He shook his head, rain or tears sliding down his face. "Because if I let them take you back, they'll break you again. Because I can't stand another body buried in the name of mercy." She stared at him, her breath unsteady. "You think I need saving?" "No," he whispered. "I think I need forgiving." For a heartbeat, neither moved. The wind howled through the canyon like a beast. Then, slowly, Cyan's fingers unclenched from the torn paper. It fluttered away, carried off into the storm. "Forgiveness is not mine to give," she said softly. "But you speak truth." Colm lowered his head. "That's all I have left." Lightning lit the sky behind them, throwing their shadows long against the rock. Cyan looked at him, really looked, and saw not a soldier, not an enemy, but a man worn thin by trying to make peace with ghosts that would never rest. Something in her chest loosened. When she reached out, her hand brushed his cheek, trembling. "Then we both are lost things," she murmured. "And lost things can walk together." He covered her hand with his, holding it there for a breath. Then another. The storm softened around them, wind easing into a low sigh. By dawn, they were riding back toward Dry Willow Creek. The world smelled of dust and renewal. Neither spoke. The silence was enough. As they reached the cabin, Colm dismounted first and turned to help her down. Cyan hesitated, then took his hand. Her palm was rough, cold, but alive. "You could have left me," she said. "I did once," he answered quietly. "I won't again." Behind them, the sky blushed, pale gold. The letter that had nearly destroyed them was gone, buried somewhere under miles of red sand. But something new, fragile as dawn, had taken its place. The days after the storm were quiet, heavy with the strange calm that follows confession. The sky turned softer, the wind cooler. Colm repaired the fence in silence, while Cyan tended to the herbs drying by the window. Neither spoke of that night by the creek. Yet something had changed between them, something unspoken but steady, like roots, finding water beneath cracked earth. Then, one afternoon, the sound of hooves shattered the stillness. 3 riders appeared at the ridge, their figures black against the pale sky. At their head rode Captain Royce Harlan, his blue coat dusty, but his smile untouched by time. Colm's stomach clenched. He'd known this moment would come. "Barrett," Harlan called as he reined in before the cabin. "I've heard you've made yourself a fine little sanctuary out here. Thought I'd see the miracle myself." Cyan stood in the doorway, her hands gripping the frame. She recognized that voice, the same cold laughter that had echoed across the burning fields years ago. Colm stepped forward. shotgun resting across his arm. "You're not welcome here." Harlan dismounted slowly, his boots crunching the dry dirt. "Don't be rude, old friend. I came to collect what's government property. That girl belongs at San Carlos Reservation. She belongs nowhere but where she chooses," Colm said evenly. Harlan's grin widened. "You've gone soft. Always knew your sympathy for savages would be your undoing." His hand brushed the butt of his pistol. "Now, step aside." For a heartbeat, the world went still. Then the cabin door creaked open. Cyan stepped out, chin lifted. The wind tugged her hair loose, and her eyes burned dark and clear. "I am not property," she said. "Not of soldiers. Not of any man." Harlan's laughter broke the tension like glass. "You hear that, Barrett? She speaks now." Colm didn't answer. His eyes locked on Harlan's. "Turn around, Captain. You'll find no allies here." The other two riders shifted uneasily. From behind the hills, figures began to appear, townsfolk from Clearwater. Men Colm had once traded with. A few even carrying rifles. The blacksmith, old Harper, called out. "You heard him, Harlan. The war's over. Leave the girl be." Harlan's smirk faltered. His gaze darted between Colm and the growing crowd. Finally, he spat into the dust. "You'll regret this, Barrett." "Maybe," Colm said quietly. "But not tonight." Harlan swung onto his horse and rode off, his men trailing behind. The sound of hooves faded into the desert wind. When silence returned, the townsfolk lingered only a moment before nodding to Colm and heading home. No one spoke of it. But something had shifted in Clearwater. The man they once called a coward now stood for something larger than his past. Inside the cabin, Cyan sat by the fire, her hands trembling though she hid it well. Colm poured water into a cup and offered it to her. "You're safe now." She shook her head. "No one is safe forever. But today, I am free." He crouched beside her, searching her face. "Cyan. You knew him." Her voice was soft, distant. "Not him, but men like him. They came to our village when I was 15. My mother was a healer," she sang to the sick. "They said she was hiding warriors. They burned everything. I ran. When I was caught, they sold me from camp to camp until no one remembered my name." Her eyes glistened, but her tone didn't tremble. "I stopped wanting to live a long time ago. I thought the desert would take me. But then you," she looked up, meeting his eyes. "You did not look at me with pity. You looked at me like I was still human. That was enough to make me remember who I was." Colm's throat tightened. "You shouldn't thank me for that." "I'm not thanking," she said simply. "I'm living." He smiled faintly at that. Then the cough came sharp, deep. The old wound in his chest had reopened, and fever followed. That night, he shivered under sweat-soaked sheets while Cyan sat beside him, crushing herbs and whispering in her native tongue. The scent of sage filled the room. When he stirred awake, she was there, wiping his brow. Outside, the sky was pearl gray. The sound of morning doves drifting through the half-open window. "You stayed," he murmured. Cyan smiled faintly. "You did not tell me to leave." He tried to sit up, wincing. "You saved me." Her fingers brushed his hand. "No, we save each other. Again and again. That is how people live." For a long time, they sat in silence, the fire burning low. Then Cyan spoke again, almost to herself. "There was a time I hated every white face I saw. I thought the earth would never give me peace. But maybe peace does not come from forgetting it, comes from choosing to stay." Colm looked at her then, truly looked the curve of her shoulders, the small scars at her wrists, the calm strength in her eyes. He realized that whatever redemption he'd hoped to find had already been given to him, wordless and undeserved. "Cyan," he said quietly, "you could still leave. Find your people, if any remain." She shook her head. "Home is not always where we were born. Sometimes it is the place that lets us breathe again." He didn't argue. He only reached for her hand. And this time she didn't pull away. The sun was rising beyond the hills, washing the desert in pale gold. For the first time since either of them could remember, the light didn't hurt. Outside, the wind carried the faint smell of rain. Inside, two hearts, scarred and stubborn, began to learn the simple rhythm of staying. Autumn crept quietly across San Simon Valley. The days were still warm, but the light had softened, turning the dust into something almost golden. Dry Willow Creek ran shallow again, yet its trickle sounded like a song, soft, persistent, alive. Weeks passed since Harlan's visit. No one came to disturb them again. The name Barrett stopped being whispered with contempt in Clearwater. Folks nodded when they passed him at the trading post, even tipped their hats toward the dark-haired woman standing beside him. Some said the soldier had found peace. Others said the Apache girl had tamed a ghost. No one knew how close both were to the truth. Life took on rhythm. Each morning, Sayen ground grain for bread, while Colm repaired the corral or tended to the horse. When the sun rose high, they shared a meal under the old oak near the well. There was laughter, sometimes quiet, sudden, unsteady, as if they were both learning how to do it again. The land, too, began to change. Where dust once ruled, patches of green pushed through. Barley sprouted near the water trough. Young cottonwoods took root where Colm had planted them with blistered hands. Sayen's herbs thrived along the fence sage. Juke, bloom, and desert lavender, filling the air with a faint sweetness that clung to their clothes. One morning, Colm found her kneeling by the new plants, humming softly. "Your medicine garden's taking over my field," he said, leaning on the fence post. She smiled without looking up. "Maybe your field needed healing too," he chuckled, shaking his head. "You're probably right." That night, they sat by the porch, watching lightning flicker far beyond the horizon. Sayen spoke after a long silence. "When I was little, my mother said thunder is the sky, remembering what it has lost. But I think sometimes it's also remembering what it still has." Colm turned the thought over in his mind, the way he always did when she spoke. "Maybe that's true for people too." She nodded. "You still have ghosts," he looked out across the dark plain. "Always, but they don't speak so loud anymore." For a while, the only sound was the low creak of the rocking chair, the hum of crickets in the grass. Then Sayen whispered, almost shyly, "Colm, I want to stay." He turned to her, startled not because he hadn't hoped for those words, but because hearing them felt like sunlight after too many winters. "Then stay," he said simply. The following weeks blurred into the steady pulse of rebuilding. They worked side by side, mending the barn roof, setting new posts, clearing dead brush. Sayen's strength surprised him. She carried her share without complaint, her small frame steady as any ranch hand. When she tired, he fetched water. When he stumbled, she laughed and offered her hand. There were no declarations, no promises, only two people learning the language of quiet trust. Then one evening, as the air turned crisp, Colm called her out to the oak by the well. The sky was a sheet of burnished copper, and the wind carried the scent of sage and rain. He held a carving knife and a small chisel. "Thought this old tree could use some words," he said, touching the rough bark. Slowly, carefully, he began to carve. Sayen watched, her eyes following the movements of his hands until the letters took shape. Home, built by two hearts. He stepped back, wiping dust from the grooves. "It's not poetry," he said, a little embarrassed. Sayen smiled, her voice soft. "It is truth." She placed her hand beside his on the bark. Their fingers brushed calloused, scarred, yet warm. Above them, the oak swayed gently, scattering a few dry leaves like blessings. "I used to think home was gone," she whispered, "that nothing would ever grow again where they burned my village." She paused, glancing toward the fields where barley bent under the wind. "But maybe home isn't something you find. Maybe it's something you build with another soul." Colm's voice came low, rough. "I thought I was done building anything, but you proved me wrong." She looked up at him, her eyes luminous in the fading light. You gave me reason to live. That's more than any man has ever given me. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. You gave me reason to forgive myself. The sun slipped behind the mesas, casting the world in shades of amber and violet. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The air between them said enough. That night, they sat by the fire, Sayan weaving a small bracelet of horsehair and turquoise beads. She tied it around his wrist while he watched, saying, "So you don't forget." "Forget what? That piece can belong to anyone who stops running." Calm looked at the tiny bracelet, rough but beautiful, and smiled. "Then I'll never take it off." Outside, the wind carried the last of summer's warmth. Coyotes called from the ridge, their howls neither lonely nor fierce, just part of the living world again. As the moon rose over San Simon Valley, its silver light caught the carved words on the oak. From a distance, they looked like a prayer etched into the skin of the earth itself. Home built by two hearts. And long after the night swallowed the desert, the wind seemed to carry a faint echo, Sayan's voice, low and steady, singing the old song her mother once sang by the fire. It was not a song of mourning anymore, but one of arrival, of choosing life after ruin. Those who passed through the valley in years to come said that if you stood by the oak on a still night, you could hear two voices intertwined in the wind, one deep and rough as earth, the other soft as rain, both whispering the same promise. That peace, once found, would not be taken again. If this story touched your heart, if you believe that love and peace can still bloom in the dust of old wars, then don't forget to leave a like and share it with someone who loves the Wild West as much as you do. Subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt tales of courage, redemption, and impossible love under the desert sun. Because out here, every lonely soul still deserves a second chance, and every quiet valley hides a story worth remembering.